My dad decided to adopt a boy after our mom passed away, but little did we know, this boy came with some deep secrets. I'm a 16-year-old female and I've always wanted a sibling. I was an only child, but I was close enough with my mom and dad that everything was fine and I had all the love I needed. I was always closer to my mom, however, as even though I had a very good relationship with my dad, I could tell that he always wanted a son, and it showed. Sometimes he would try to do father-son stuff with me, and it just did not work. I could always see him looking disappointed. I overheard him talking with Mom about trying for another kid several times, but Mom had a problem with her uterus and could not give birth to any more children. Otherwise, it could really hurt her. I blocked these thoughts out of my mind constantly, though, and just the best time I could have with both of them. About 2 months ago, my mom passed away, and things went downhill very quickly at home. Both me and my dad were pretty much depressed. He started being very, very distant towards me. He would often eat alone, we never went out anymore, and we barely did anything together. It felt like I lost both my mom and dad. I couldn't take it anymore. Sometimes I found him crying in his room, and every time I tried to talk to him, I felt like things were just getting worse, so I left him alone. A month passed like this, and life was very, very hard. So I just confined in my friends and focused on school as much as possible. So I joined a bunch of extracurricular stuff and just stayed away from home as much as possible. A month ago, I came home late one day and all the lights of the house were on, which was unusual. I went inside and everything was spotless and organized. My dad wasn't downstairs, so I kept looking around and eventually found him upstairs with another boy who looked about my age. I asked what's going on, and my dad told me that he adopted a boy. Deep down, I was shocked and angry, but I couldn't show it. I knew how much he's always wanted this, so I did not want to ruin his happiness and realized that he probably only did this as a coping mechanism. He introduced the boy, Jack, to me and gave him a tour of the house. I don't know if Jack was just shy or not, but he barely said a word to me the whole time. Surprisingly, my dad seemed extremely happy. It was the first time I saw him smile and laugh in 2 months, and a part of me was happy for him. But I was also very angry that he took his decision without asking me, and that everything would change now. My dad cooked dinner, which he pretty much never did, and we had a good meal before he showed Jack to his room to sleep. I sat down with my dad to talk to him, and I did not want to see him like I was disapproving, but he caught on. He told me how even though he loved me, he always wanted this, and that he just did not know how to cope after Mom's death. He blamed me for being away from home so often, and that he was just lonely. I wanted to tell him that being around him was like being around a brick, but I thought I'd watch his emotions and just stay quiet. I told him that I was fine with having a stepbrother and that I'm happy for him. The next day, I was supposed to spend some time with my stepbrother. All three of us had breakfast together and he was still pretty quiet. Whenever I would get up to leave, he would start talking to my dad, but as soon as I got back, he would become quiet again. I didn't know whether or not I was supposed to talk to him, but I just left it as, I don't know, until he was comfortable enough. We all went together out, but he was still avoiding me like the plague. We were at the mall and my dad went to get something alone, so I tried striking up a conversation with Jack. I asked him about his hobbies, his life, his past, but anytime I mentioned what happened before the foster home, he'd get all twitchy and change the subject. We talked a little bit about movies and school, but that was it. He just took every change to end a conversation. I don't know how I was supposed to get to know him, but it went on like this for a few days. Family time became weird. I would come home from school late because of my activities. And as soon as I would enter, I'd find Jack and Dad sitting down, having dinner together while laughing and watching football. As soon as I would enter, Jack would stop laughing or just go to his room. The first time, Dad told me they got hungry and couldn't wait. But it kept happening. I was hurt that Dad just never showed any interest in having dinner with me, and that I was this buzzkill who kills the mood as soon as I enter a room. Even with all three of us together, they look like they just zone out if I start talking about anything. It became the loneliest time in my life, even more than when my mom died. With Dad completely ignoring me and giving all his attention to Jack, I became more and more distant. I would stay out later than usual, not be well kempt, or tell my dad I'm spending the night over at a friend's and he'd never bat an eye. I wanted to see what he would do or actually care. One night, I stayed up way too late and my friend and I decided to sneak into the public library when it was closed. We were doing it just for the thrill of it, not because we wanted anything. We had a whole plan and everything. But we got caught while inside and we were taken to the police station. I was afraid my dad would freak out since they called him, but he just arrived, took me home, told me not to do that again, and continued his time with Jack. He didn't even seem that bothered by it, did not yell or anything. It was extremely infuriating. I felt like no matter what I did, he's been completely consumed by my new stepbrother. I wanted to stay away for a while, so I spent a few days at my friend's house, and he barely even called to check if I was okay. I couldn't stay over there forever though, so I got back eventually, but I wish I hadn't, as things completely changed. All of a sudden, Dad had changed the decorations and furniture in the living room, probably because of Jack. I just did not recognize him anymore. The next day, my dad woke me up, looking very angry, asking me where I put Jack's smartwatch. I told him I had no idea where it was, but he kept scolding me for something I didn't do. Apparently, Jack told him that I went to his room while he was asleep. I kept swearing I didn't do it, but Jack kept insisting yes, it was me. After looking around, they found the smartwatch in my drawer. Of course, no amount of swearing could convince my dad it wasn't me. Jack just kept telling him that I was jealous of their new relationship. I could not believe someone who would do something like this, sneaking into something that belonged to them and act as if I've stolen it. This was just the first of many sociopathic attempts by my stepbrother to make it seem like I was in the wrong or did something to him. Another time, they found his bike under my car in the driveway. I swore that his bike wasn't even parked there, but they kept insisting I probably ran it over parking. No matter what I did, my dad just not would believe me on anything. Of course, anytime something of Jack's went missing, it was automatically me who did it. Each time, my dad got more and more furious and started punishing me. Across different situations. He grounded me, took away my car, cut my allowance, made my curfew earlier, and one time, he just left me at home alone and went off with Jack on a fishing trip. Even though he knew how much I loved fishing with him, and we used to do it with Mom so often. The absolute worst situation that happened though was Dad coming home one day to find Jack bruised with cuts on his arm. Dad was absolutely livid and asked him what happened. Of course, what do you think? He told him it was me. No matter how much I tried to defend myself, my dad was completely blinded by the truth and still blamed me. I kept trying to understand, but my punishment for that one was even worse. I had to attend a school-like summer camp, but without any of the fun summer stuff. So I'd be completely away from everyone. At one point, I had enough and went to talk to Jack. He was avoiding me at first, of course, and kept trying to leave the conversation. But I literally locked the door and put the key in my pocket, so he had to listen. I asked him what the hell was wrong with him, why he was doing these things. But he kept telling me that he did not want to know what I was even talking about. I was getting absolutely mental, and once I grabbed his arm, he started screaming out of nowhere, "Dorothy! Dorothy!" and just went into a deep panic attack. My dad ran up and tried to open the door. Of course it was locked, so he starts banging on the door until I unlock it. As soon as he went in, he yelled at me and asked me what I thought I was doing. Jack was on the floor screaming. I just froze and had no idea what was even happening. Dad stayed upstairs with him for a while before coming down. He yelled at me so hard that day that I was genuinely afraid that he might hit me for the first time in his life. I asked him what was going on. He told me that before Jack was put in foster care, he lived in a very abusive household where his older sister, Dorothy, abused him his entire life. He got out of this home and was put in foster care at 13, and he's been traumatized by his sister ever since. Everything suddenly made sense about him. Being so apprehensive towards me, for some reason, I reminded him of his sister. Or he was just traumatized by the idea of having a sister to begin with. A part of me was sympathizing with him, but it also was not an excuse to keep fabricating stories just to paint me as the bad guy. After we were finished, my dad sent me to my room and told me that I'd be severely punished for this. He spent around 3 hours with Jack in his room. I had no idea what they were talking about the whole time. When he came out, he came back into my room, told me that I would be shipped off to boarding school to finish my remaining 2 years of high school. The words hit me like a truck. I literally froze solid, not knowing what to say. I was so furious that all that happened was that a tear just came down my eye. That was it. I didn't even try to talk, since I knew this was a lost battle at war. I just told him that if Mom were here, she'd absolutely be disgusted at how blind he's become. He asked me how dare I tell him that, and it was out of the inheritance too. Nothing was fair anymore, so I just ran away from home for an entire week, decided not to go back since I wouldn't be seeing anyone anyways. There was no way I was going to boarding school, so I just ran. I did not go to any of my friends' places, so I had to stay at a motel for a few days, until things calmed down a bit. I knew my dad was strongly influenced by Jack, and that he would not really do this. I don't know what kind of schmoozing and manipulation Jack was pulling, but there's no way a deeply traumatized kid with sister issues came up with the plan to ship me off to boarding school and cut me out of the inheritance. I knew I couldn't just trust him at all, and I did not buy the whole family sob story, so I had a plan. My first stop was the foster home my dad adopted from. I went over there, explained everything that's happening, and asked him if his story was actually real. The man there refused to give me details at first, but I told him about the gravity of the situation and how much my dad was being manipulated. So he sat me down and told me the whole thing. He told me that Jack was put up for adoption for extremely violent behavior. He acted strange against his parents and stole from them. He had a sister, Dorothy, whom he apparently hurt and abused. Over time, his antics became worse and worse. The family couldn't take it anymore, so they put him up for adoption. I knew he was lying about the whole thing, and now I had proof. At least I could send my dad to the foster house so he can hear the story and see the file for himself. I didn't know whether or not to come home just yet. So, I started following Jack around and seeing what he was up to. Most days, he went to school as usual and came home on time. He seemed like the perfect little Boy Scout. But I often saw him with a group of friends, despite the fact that he kept telling us he didn't have any friends at school and he was struggling. Anyways, I kept digging around and started following him at night too. Most days, he went to the pizzeria, then came home. But some days, he went to the strange hipstery club, where I could not enter because apparently it's super exclusive. I didn't even know how he got a piece of that exclusivity, but I started monitoring that place constantly. Over time, I started noticing a specific type of activity going on around that place, and I suspected drugs were involved. One night, I followed Jack around the club, but this time he did not enter. The security gave a call to someone inside who went out to meet Jack. Jack had some kind of bag on him that he was giving to people at the club. I kept trying to gaze a better look, but it was hard. Eventually, one of the club people Jack was meeting pulled out some white powder from the bag Jack gave him and started snorting it. I immediately knew it was cocaine. I was livid and knew Dad had to find out about this, but from Jack himself. I went over to the club, an empty alleyway, where Jack was alone and confronted him. I told him I knew he was dealing, and that Dad and the police are certainly going to find out. I also told him that the whole sister story was fake, so I was on to him. I threatened that my dad would turn him into the police, and that the jail is way worse than a foster home. So Jack's eyes suddenly went crazy. He attacked me. I had no idea he would do that, but he pinned me to the floor and started choking me. There was nothing I could do until I heard police sirens coming closer and closer till all of a sudden, a police officer grabbed Jack off of me and tossed him around. I could finally breathe again, and they threw some handcuffs on him. Apparently, they came here to do cop work inside the entire club. Of course, since Jack went to jail, my dad heard about what happened and how he tried to kill me. I told Dad everything, and he apologized like crazy. After realizing what he's done and how blind he was, he told me that nothing can fix what he's done, but I chose to forgive him. Jack was most likely going to juvy, where he would spend the rest of his non-adult time. Since everything was fabricated, my dad and I became closer than ever. After a few weeks, Jack did in fact go to juvy, and my dad promised never to do that again. I was just imagining how crazy this situation would be in if I was in OP's position. This story was insane. I'm glad though at the end of the story, karma struck and OP finally got the relationship back with the dad. We're going to turn our attention to the next story of the day, but make sure you drop your opinions of that one in the comment section below. Am I the a-hole for forcing my father to pay child support? If you're not subscribed to the channel, guys, click that subscribe button. Here comes story number 2. My father's a jerk. When he got my mother pregnant, he wanted her to quit her job and just stay home to, quote, be a good little wife and mother. He's very well off due to a trust fund, and he doesn't really need to work. My mother refused and divorced him. Because of a prenup, she got very little and he moved back to Europe. His parents just straight up never knew about me. And my mother had a good profession. I never really wanted for anything. My grandmother and grandfather, her mom and dad, were awesome. I got to spend my summers exploring the wilds of Western Canada with them. My father never paid the child support he should have. Like I said, it didn't really matter. My mom makes good money and she gave me a great life as a child. So the point of this is, I'm a 28-year-old female getting married. I met the love of my life. 31-year-old at a university, and we've been together for 8 glorious years. He's a wonderful person, and he really is my lobster. Sorry, that's a little inside joke. His family is from the same city as my father, and they're a huge, rambunctious bunch. Because, well, of a lot of intermingled business and personal relationships, my paternal grandparents found out about my impending wedding, and me, I suppose. They've been in contact and want to come to Canada to meet me and my fiancé, who I guess is a grandson of an acquaintance of theirs. Small world. When they found out that my father had basically abandoned me to fend for myself in this world, this is honestly how they see it. They were pissed, to say the least. It is very funny because we're decidedly upper middle class here. So, long story short, they had to hire their lawyer calculate the amount of child support my father should have paid with interest and the cost of my post-secondary education. They then gave me this as a gift. What I did not know was that it came out of my father's yearly draw of his trust fund. He's furious because it obviously is a sizable amount of money, and it'll very much affect his finances for at least the next 2 years. He may need a get a job. He's been contacting me and telling me that his current wife and children will be negatively affected if I don't give him the money back. I don't really need it, and I guess I am entitled to it, and I'm getting a trust fund now as well. But I really want to pay off any debt my mother may have, and make sure that when she retires, she can do whatever suits her fancy. I'm not giving it back. Am I the a-hole for that? So, most people are saying not the a-hole on this story. Here's the top comment. Not the a-hole, he should have been paying it all along. And your grandparents sound bad A. OP replied by saying this. They're coming over next week and I'm looking forward to meeting them. They're coming to my wedding. They're super embarrassed that they weren't there for me growing up. Totally not their fault, but I think embarrassment is part of being British. Alright guys, so let me know what you thought of that story. If you have any similar story or situation that you've been through, drop it down in the comments and let's talk about it. Thank you so much for tuning in today. As always, Mr. Reddito will be back for some more tomorrow. See you then. The latest Mr. Reddito producer, Christine Billings. Thank you so much for the support.